All right. Hello there, everyone out there in Comm 210 YouTube land. How are you doing on this lovely, stormy, of course, now it's sunny, just as I flip the switch, at least here in Indiana, afternoon. Happy big cars go fast, vroom vroom day as well. And of course, remember our fallen veterans on Memorial Day, which is tomorrow. Anywho, tonight we're going to go over several things, but the first thing I should probably do is make sure you have access to this video. So I should click around here. This is always the most awkward time of the stream, or of the broadcast, or whatever you call it, because I need to give you a link to this video, and it's not going to do it for me. So I'm going to have to go to my YouTube just channel. I never figured out how to really do this. Okay, so here we go. Streamception. There we go. I muted it before it got too bad. Okay, so I can copy and paste the link in here for you, and hopefully within just a few moments we'll start filling the place up. Okay. Let's also hope that I got the correct. Yes, it was the summer session. Whew. You don't have no idea. You have no idea how many times I've submitted the link to the wrong dealy bobber. All right, let's bring up my chat interface and we'll go ahead and get started. How about that? So today we're going over a couple of topics, and really, by going over a couple of topics, I mean we're going to cover one and your assignment, and then I have to. There's no other way I can do this, folks, and I really apologize, but I'll have to have you watch a second video, a pre-recorded video about how to do outlining and informative speaking. It's about an hour long. I've been racking my brain for a couple days now about how to present that information, and I'm having a hard time. I couldn't figure out how to do it, so we're just gonna have to watch two videos this week, but one of them is pre-recorded, so that should be easy for you to do, and the link is in the description of this video, so that information will be accessible to you. Let's go ahead and move away from the screen and go on to some content, shall we? So a while ago, as you may recall, it was assigned to you that you needed to read all of Chapter 1. And then we had a speech week in which you got used to your technology and recorded a speech. By the way, that speech is due still tonight at midnight or 11:59 p.m., if you prefer to think of it that way. Please do get that to me as soon as possible around there. I have noticed that a fair number of you have turned it in, so I'm thinking there's probably just a couple people at this point that maybe haven't. But yeah, do get that to me. I have been looking at them. Again, there is no real rubric. This was a question I had this week. There is no real rubric to go with that intro speech. It's just, did you answer the three questions? Did you speak not really even up to the maximum time limit? It was more or less, did you do a good-hearted effort to answer those three questions I gave you, and did you upload the speech so that I could see it? And that was really the latter part was the important part. Did you upload the speech so that I could see it? That was practice to do the more in-depth assignments like this one, so that you can have practice with that. Okay, so Chapter 1, the human communication process. There was a lot of information in there, but there's a couple of things that we wanted to talk about first. And that first idea is, what is communication? After all, speaking and public speaking is not just in the communication studies department, but it is a primary way in which we do communicate as a society. And even though you may not think of yourself as having a speech in public, whenever you're out talking at lunch, whenever you're presenting things to your friends or trying to get them to go see a movie, whatever you're trying to do, you are using your public speaking skills and your communication skills in that effort. So we need to kind of describe what communication is. So we have a couple of ideas here, like a girl batting her eyes at a frat boy from across the room. Um, that's communication because I'm sure many of us have heard of, before this class, of nonverbal ideas, or rather nonverbal communication. That's one of those. Any kind of flirtatious behavior, again, or body language would be communication. Barack Obama gives an address about universal health care. That would be definitely something that is communication, because that is something we probably more think about as a traditional public speech. I should probably upgrade this to our current president. Um, but anyway, a student slouches in his chair during class. Now, this is something that a lot of people would say, "Not what? No way. That's not communication at all. That's just a kid that he has his 10 a.m. Comm 210 class and he just wants to go back to sleep." But this is also nonverbal communication here, or at the very least, it's interpreted as such because we associate meaning with this action here, the slouching. And that meaning is usually, man, I am bored. Not necessarily, man, I am feeling an overwhelming biological need to sleep. And lastly, a child watches a program about prehistoric giant whales. And even though we do not necessarily think about this as communication, it is. Anytime that you are trying to get information from somewhere, like watching a speech on YouTube or watching a video on YouTube like this one, it is also still communication. Even though there isn't, quote unquote, a way for that child to interact with the people on the other end of that broadcast, it is still a communication process. And we're going to talk about why that is here in a second. In any case, the big dictionary definition for what communication is a continuous, ever-changing process of interaction. And even though there is no like physical way that a child can interact through a TV, to talk to the people who made that whale documentary, that's still a communication process that does involve interaction and feedback. We'll talk about that in a second. So there are some things that in your book, there were several models for communication presented. There was that helical model, or I believe it's called Dance's helical model, that was kind of like a tornado-looking thing, that was scrawled in your textbook. And what that is trying to describe how communication, once it starts, it kind of expands out, kind of like playing the game telephone, or maybe how just maybe as adults you would probably have a better understanding of how rumors spread than maybe smaller children. When one person tells another person so and so's got a crush on whatever, um, that gets around and it tends to expand the circle of people who know that information as time goes on. And that's what the helical model was about. But the real model of communication we're going to be primarily concerned with is the more practical kind, because it allows us to think about our speeches and how it's best to communicate our ideas, how it's best to communicate our messages. This model is called the SMCR model, as you can see here, SMCR, for the first letter of every component of the model. The first part is what we call the source, which is the composer of a message. Maybe you can think of this as the author, but we call this the source of a message. So sometimes the source of a message is not necessarily the thing that the message comes out of, or the media that the message comes out of. That would actually be channel. The source is the author. So for example, in our previous example, it's two slides ago, this child watching a program about prehistoric giant whales. The source is not the television set. The source is the group of people that made the program. Okay, so a source is always going to be a person, or possibly a chimp, as those are the only two creatures that I know of that are capable of composing a message, of putting symbols and words together to try to communicate some kind of idea to another organism. So the source is always going to be a person and not really a thing like a television set or radio or poster. The source is always going to be a person or group of people. All right. So a message is a discrete chunk of communication, an article, a song, and it's not necessarily the main idea. Now, oftentimes when people say, "Hey, did you read my message?" what they really meant was, "Did you understand my idea? Did you read my idea?" Um, and this might be kind of tricky here because in our activity for selecting our speech topic, I need you to think about what your message is going to be, not just your main idea, but the entire chunk of communication. Are you going to use multiple channels? Are you going to use just one kind of information? Are you going to do a variety of other things? So your message is going to be a little bit more involved than "I would like to inform my audience how to tie a shoe." It needs to be just a little bit more involved than that. Um, so finally, not finally, but next let's move on to channel. The channel is the sense through which a message is accepted. For example, a newspaper's channel is through sight, and a song is through hearing. The channel, again, is not really the media through which something is conveyed. This is going to be a sense. So both the source and the channel, guys and gals, is going to be a person up here and a human sense over here. The medium you're going to use is going to be part of this discrete chunk of communication. Okay, I know that's probably confusing, but the message is, we even have this expression, the medium is the message. That's not quite what that expression means. It actually means that people, when they want to communicate a difficult idea, maybe they'll use a text message instead of a face-to-face communication because they don't want to deal with the emotional baggage or whatever, and that itself contains a great degree of meaning. But nonetheless, the idea is that the message, it has all that extraneous information involved in it. Is it a book? Is it a newspaper? The channel is going to be sight, sound, taste, even can deliver messages. Okay, and finally, the receiver, which is the audience of a message. And it doesn't necessarily mean the receiver is going to be a particular addressee, right? The receiver is just whoever happens to see the message. So that's an important thing to consider because, and as I'm sure we're all aware, people sometimes receive messages that are not meant for them, email chains that maybe aren't meant to be seen by prying eyes, but somehow are sent to the entire work group, and then you are also a receiver of that message. So receivers, again, you want to think about the channels you're using, the kind of message, the medium that you're sending it through, and how it could be perceived through the channel, and whether or not there are going to be receivers there at the other end of all of that, that you maybe don't want to see the message. I don't think that particular question probably won't be a concern for you in making speeches for this class, but it is something that you want to be aware of when you think about when you go through any kind of other interaction. You need to think about these three things. Oftentimes the source is yourself, so you don't need to diagram that out necessarily, but you're thinking about what kind of how you're going to do a presentation for a work group. You need to kind of figure out messages, channels, and receivers ahead of time to help you plan. And hopefully this activity that we're going to do this week will kind of help you with that process. Okay, so more anatomy of interaction here. These are some verbs and a couple of concepts here that should help you in understanding what exactly some of these roles do. So sources, or the authors of messages, do something we call encoding. All right, they take symbols and words or actions and they attribute meaning to them. Right, encoding is the act of attributing meaning to things and to convey a message. Again, all of communication is kind of this idea that, well, it's about taking an idea from my brain and trying to insert it into yours. But different people have different ways of understanding messages, of understanding these symbols, and words are symbols. Um, and so when you say I am sad, uh, the other person may not necessarily feel sad about that same incident, not just because they have different life experience, but simply because they attribute a different emotional state to the word sad. And this can be a troublesome thing. But nonetheless, we try to go through this clumsy system of encoding meaning to symbols and trying to put ideas from our brains into the brains of others. On the other end of that, of the encoding, is the decoding, which is the process of looking at symbols or actions to try to interpret meaning from a message. And we do all kinds of things to help us decode messages. For example, going along with the whole some words don't mean the same to other people. If you ever go to a doctor's office, you'll probably see a poster on the side of one of their examination rooms that says something like, how bad is your pain? And it'll say one. I noticed it when I first got the pain, but never again. And then 10 is, this is the worst pain of my life. And then in the middle of that spectrum, they might have things that people commonly experience, like a broken bone, a paper cut, things like that. So that way you can kind of look at that scale that they have in there, and they'd be like, well, if broken bone is number 6 on this scale, and I've had a broken bone before, and what I'm experiencing now is definitely beyond that, then I need to tell my doctor, hey, it's like a 7, 8, 9, or probably if it's a broken bone, this is going to be a 10 because I've already had a broken bone, and this is more excruciating than that. So that's a way that you can tell the doctor, a little more specifically rather than I hurt real bad, so that they kind of know, how severe this incident is that you're maybe seeing them for. Nonetheless, that's kind of what decoding is like. You go through. It's a very conscious process. It happens a lot of to us, I guess you could say automatically, because we speak English. We hear other people speak English or maybe another language that we're comfortable with, um, and we just kind of feel like we know what they're talking about. But really, decoding is a conscious process that we use aids and visual aids and all kinds of nonverbal cues and things to help us decode what maybe messages are saying or what sources are trying to say to us. Next, we have this idea of noise, and it comes in 2 varieties, internal and external. And noise is any kind of interference. It's not necessarily literal buzzing in the background type noise. Noise is any kind of thing that might get in the way of someone understanding your message. So internal noise is the kinds of stuff that happens to you inside of your own mind. Okay. It can also be a physiological process. So, for example, being in a class or watching this video and it's 8:20 at night and you haven't eaten yet. Oh, you're just watching this video thinking, I am really hungry. I am so hungry. And then the next thing you know, I clicked the slide and it's away. That's an example of internal noise because you are focusing on a physiological need rather than the communication. And that's an interference with the communication. And of course, external noise is anything that happens outside of your body. So maybe there is a literal noise like an air conditioner running in the room that's really loud and interferes with listening to the video. It can also doesn't necessarily have to be through your ears. Maybe it's too hot in the room where you're sitting right now, and you're focusing on the fact that it's extremely, extremely hot. So that is possible as well. In the end, someone asked me when I use this example, it says, well, isn't focusing on being hot internal noise? Um, I don't think it's necessarily necessary we get that into the nitty gritty about it. Things that originate in your mind, like physiological needs, like being hungry, being sleepy, being bored, those are all internal noises. External things are things that you don't necessarily have. I guess you don't necessarily have control over any of them necessarily. However, external noise originates from outside your body. Okay, hunger, that's something that your metabolism is doing to you. Temperature, that's something the sun does to the atmosphere that then works upon you. At least that's how I envision it. That's how it was explained to me. We can go back and forth as to whether or not mind over matter. If you're hot, just pay attention to the video, and therefore it's internal noise for some people, and we don't need to worry about that. Just know that external noise is anything that occurs from outside your body, right? So if the question on an exam is, this is the kind of noise in which the interference originates from outside your own body and mind, then you know the answer to that is external, okay? Next, feedback, verbal or nonverbal reaction to a message. So anytime there's a message, we receive feedback and we generate feedback. Even though, just like that child in the example with the whale, I cannot see your reaction to my video, but you are sending me feedback. Maybe some of you are taking notes. Maybe some of you are in the kitchen making dinner for your family. Maybe others of you have stopped the video and are skipping around to see if I ever move away from this slide. All of those things are feedback. They communicate to me, or they would. I mean, again, the whole idea of sending feedback isn't that there's a realistic chance that I would perceive it. It is actually just that you are encoding it and sending it out into the world. So maybe you're bored, maybe you're attentive, maybe you're distracted. Any of those things could be happening right now, and you're telling me what those things are. I just can't perceive it, which is rather tragic, but you are giving me feedback regardless of whether or not I can perceive it. And next, I have a quiz I usually do for my in-class session, but let's just go ahead and diagram this out real quick here. So here's an example of a piece of communication, and maybe this example isn't so good on a digital slide here because, at least on mine, the screen is supposed to present it in the video as it appears on my screen, which usually in a classroom this would actually be projected and be a bit smaller than it is. But one of the things that we talk about is, well, what is the source of this message? What is the source of this poster? And a lot of people will say, well, the source is the poster. It's not correct. The source would be these folks over here in NSERC, Canada, the National Sciences of Engineering Research Council of Canada. Those are the people who made the poster. Those are the people who chose the words. Those are the people who chose the pictures and attributed and encoded all of that meaning into this poster. So they're the source. Again, sources are always people or maybe a group of people. They're never things. Next is what is the message? Again, a lot of people will say, Canada, a cool place to do research, and whatever this is in French, which is probably the same thing in French. But that's not true, because remember, the message is actually this whole thing because they picked pictures to put with the text. They put the text in a certain area, and that probably communicates meaning. They have more text down here. Again, the message is not just the main idea, or not necessarily the main idea. The main idea might be this, but the way they communicate it was with all of this other information added too. And when you think about messages, you have to have that comprehensive view of how it is, how your ideas are being encoded and trying to communicate. So they're not just using the verbal channel here. They're using a lot of other visual things as well to try to get you to think about doing research in Canada. Speaking of that, we can move on to the next part of the model, which would be the channel. Now this one has only one channel, and that would be sight, because remember, channels are not about saying the poster. Channels are the way the message will be perceived, and the way that only an image can be perceived is through sight. So this has only one channel in it. When you go to make your informative speech, you might listen to the assignment prompt in the other video, and I'll go over it quickly here too, don't worry. But as the instructions are explained to you, you might decide that maybe more than one channel is appropriate. For example, you might be like, well, I know I've got the audio covered because I'll be talking, um, but maybe I do need to try to incorporate some kind of visual aid in the background. Um, and next week we'll watch a example video so that you can record your speeches and be a little less anxious about that, I think. But you might still decide that you might need a background that has some information on it to aid in your video. In which case, you might need another channel, right? Which would be Sight. So you need to be thinking about those things because maybe you have a cool topic. Let's say it's acupuncture. It's kind of a mystical thing. It's kind of an abstract idea. Um, Maybe people who aren't familiar with it would appreciate some kind of visual for how acupuncture works, as opposed to just listening to you describe it. Others of you might have a subject like, which is equally cool, like how McDonald's makes all of their hamburgers the same, right? It's an interesting process, but a lot of people have had McDonald's hamburgers. They don't necessarily need to know what one looks like. Therefore, you can probably get away with just explaining the process of making one because you know that everyone has seen one and experienced one before. So you probably don't need anything other than your vocal voice as a way to or rather you perceive that your receivers don't need anything other than the audio of your vocal quality voice. Next, the last thing about this is the receiver. And again, it's kind of a trick question. If I were to ask you who the receiver is, a lot of people will say, well, I am. But the reality is that anybody who sees this poster is the receiver, regardless of whether or not it was intended for you to view or not. Usually, if this were an in-class session, someone would walk by the hallway conveniently right now, and I would point to them and startle them a little bit and say, that person right there is also a receiver of this poster because they glanced in the classroom and saw it. So it's not just, again, the people you intend to show it to, but it's anyone that happens to see it is the receiver. Okay, and then one thing that I would talk about here is I would say, hey, let's talk about some noise with this poster. And a lot of people would actually say, well, immediately they would say, actually, some noise is some visual noise here in that we can't actually read this text at the bottom. And it is extremely small, and on a projector, it is extremely blurry as well. And you can't actually say that this says Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, Canada. You can read that probably because we're on like a 1-to-1 view ratio on a broadcast here, but in a classroom, just trust me, you can't really see it. And the idea that something is blurry on a picture is a source of noise, and it is a source of external noise because the problem is originating from outside of your body, right? Um, so that's how that it would work. That's how that's so that's anyway. The point is that you need to be concerned about that kind of noise too. So if you're thinking about doing a visual aid for this, full well knowing that I haven't gone over how to do visual aids yet, and we probably won't until probably 4 out of week 5. We have 5 weeks. Probably week 4 we'll get around to it. Um, um, and that's usually how it is, by the way, in the normal semester. Usually we get about 10 to 12 weeks into it before we talk about visual aids specifically. But anyway, the point is, if you decide to do a visual aid, you need to at least consider what are some things that could interfere with someone actually reading the way that I want my visual aid read, because that's also a source of noise. So let's go ahead and this is some other examples. We don't need to go over those. So that's our little bit of a lecture on the SMCR model and some things to consider when doing a speech as a result of that model. Let's go ahead and look at our assignment. We can call it a broadcast. Where did I put it? Oh, yes, it's in your discussion section. And I'll probably have to write an email after the broadcast concludes just so people know to look here if they're not watching the broadcast. I did start late today because of a power outage from a popcorn storm that blew in. So that's probably why we have a low turnout tonight. But in any case, people will want to know where this is, and it's in the discussion board. So for this week's activity, this is basically your assignment. Besides watching the 2 videos, this is the other part that you need to do. You can tell that I'm kind of chuckling here because this is a lot of work, and I know it, and I appreciate it that you're going to. I'm sure you're going to give it the old college try, and I hope that it turns out to be a reasonable amount of work for a 7-day period. But anyway, so here's our activity for this week, your actual writing activity. For this first part of your weekly assignment, I want you to do 2 things. I want you to first create a thread and tell us what your informative speech topic is by Wednesday, May 31st at 11:59 p.m. So that is this coming Wednesday. It's a little odd because it's not part of our usual Sunday to Sunday schedule, but as I was thinking about it, again, I just couldn't figure out a way to get things to happen in a good order that was also fast enough for us to complete the course. So by Wednesday, you need to create a thread and tell us what your informative speech topic is. So let me I can show you an example of that real quick. So I went ahead and I entered the forum here. There's nothing here yet. I'll go ahead and create a thread. And the example might be example thread for informative speech topic. We're going to have to do several things to this. But our first thing is I want my speech to be about, let's see, what's a good topic these days? The Rift Valley in Africa. And I actually don't know much about that topic. So that would be, if I were actually doing a speech, then that would be a fun one for me to do. I would probably want to specify what I want to talk about. The Rift Valley is a cool place where I know a lot of human fossils are found. I think for a good speech, I will cover the, and then that, again, this is just brainstorming, so I'm just pulling it out of thin air, guys. The 3 most famous, right? Again, totally arbitrary. Could have been 4 most famous, could have been 5, could have been 2. Probably need more than 1, but so 3 most famous fossils found in the Rift Valley, and explain why they were preserved there. Okay, that's pretty specific. I got. You can tell I haven't done any research on it because I don't know the names of the fossils, and that's totally okay. I'm not going to sit here as an instructor and be like, man, this person doesn't know crud about the Rift Valley. That's kind of the point. You want to choose your topic about something that you're interested in, but maybe it's something you want to know more about. So on one hand, it's great that you have a lot of information to start with because you're passionate about this topic. At the same time, pick something that you want to learn more about. I don't know why these 2 areas have different font in them, but whatever. You saw me type it out. This is just what Blackboard did to me. It's the way it is. Okay, so that's the first part. So we got that. As part of our thread, diagram the speech by telling us the source, message, and receiver. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that right now. The source for this speech would be I would be the author of this speech, but I would rely on a couple other sources or information that I can then lay to you all. All right, so we got that. And again, I recommend that you think about it as thoroughly as possible. You may not know exactly who your sources are, but you should probably acknowledge that you'll need to use other people. Okay, so we've done that. Good job. The next is the message, and this is where we want to think about, what might be good. So definitely, part of my message is going to be audio, and we can kind of start this here too. I will use audio channel. Communicate most of my ideas, and then the message will be part of my ideas will be communicated by human speech, but since let's say that since the Rift Valley is kind of an obscure, I'm going to put that in quotes marks because maybe you think it's all heard of it before. This obscure topic, I might need to include a visual aid so that everyone knows where I'm talking about. It's hard to describe verbally. Okay, so then I'll be able to revise this here and say I will also use the visual channel, reinforce a verbal description of where and what Rift Valley is. And then receiver, and then again, this is kind of automatic here, is whoever gains access to my video. That's kind of a freebie. That's just to, I guess, make sure you're paying attention. Okay, so now we need to figure out the third part of this assignment, or the third part of this first part. Man, I'm really making it complex, aren't I? As you do this speech, make sure you think about potential sources of noise that receivers could experience during your speech. What are they, and what will you do? Okay, so I'm thinking about it, and sources of noise. Well, I know from experience, and from that example we just went over on the whole SMCR model with the poster, is that I know that if my visual aid isn't well captured by the camera, people may not see it, and this would be a source of interference noise. How I would avoid that is that I will make sure that the object is, or the object, how about the visual aid, is in focus of the camera, is visible on a test recording that I will watch for making the real recording. That way, I'm fairly confident that people who see my video after I upload it will also be able to see the visual aid. Okay. Here's a question that people often ask me, at least in person, is what, if anything, should we consider for like internal sources of noise? Because in a class that's on a scheduled part of the day where we meet in a building, might be around lunchtime. One of my students was like, well, if everybody's hungry at this 11 o'clock a.m. hour, that's a source of noise. Should I plan to try to alleviate that in some way? In other words, she was asking if she should bring food. That's ultimately what I got her to say. And I said, well, that's fun, but that could also lead to other sources of noise, such as people opening the food, chewing the food, and other things like that. And sometimes the solutions we seek to noise can actually make the noise situation more complex, such as giving people something to eat. Now, again, that's not like a final end-all be-all answer. In fact, a lot of people that do professional presentations around lunchtime do recommend that you bring some kind of treat to the meeting. In fact, I had a person that was in my she was my professor for my administration course that I took when I was getting my PhD in education. And she said that all meetings have three things: food, fun, and fellowship. So there are people that consider distributing food, especially around like a dinner or a lunchtime type meeting, to be essential to your reduction of noise and therefore your communication success. However, there are also people that criticize that decision by, saying, well, the chewing will create a lot of noise. If there's going to be opening of packages, that'll create a lot of noise, and so on and so forth. So it's not really definitive. But what I'm trying to say here is that that's a really good line of thought to go along. But for this class, I don't think you need to worry about internal noise because people are going to be watching these videos on their own time if they're going to watch them at all. By the way, not this video, but the next two videos that you will record for this class, we are going to share with a smaller group of people in the class rather than just me. But anyway, the point is that I'm trying to make here is that you probably don't have to consider internal noise so much as the external kind, because the external kind is going to ultimately originate with you and your choices for how you record the video, whereas the internal noise, let us hope that it's mitigated by the fact that people watch these videos whenever they have the opportunity to, when they know they won't be distracted by their physiological processes. And heck, even if they are, they can pause it, right, and rewind. So that's a great thing that happens that won't happen in the real world. But I wanted to talk about that real briefly. So let's see. And let's go ahead and say that we're done here. This is our example post. I did everything that I asked myself to do. The next thing that I would do, which I'm not going to model right now, because I have an example right here in the instructions, is that by Sunday, so a week from today, you need to look at this discussion forum and reply to 2 other students' topics by telling the classmate whether or not you would be interested in such a speech. Please do be kind to one another. If you need to criticize someone's speech, go ahead and say something politely, like, learning how to tie shoelaces is important for people. But I feel that many people in the audience have mastered it already. So maybe a speech about something else related to shoes would be more appropriate, like insert something else about shoes. So that would be something that you can do, but be kind about it. Don't say, shoelaces suck, bro. You really need to work on how you're gonna do this speech. Man, just awful. Do not do that. If you're going to criticize somebody and say that their idea is not the best, then say your idea is not the best. Here's maybe another idea that might be a little bit better, and try your darndest to maybe try to fit it within the same topic area, just so, kind of like in this example here, where they can talk about something they like and that think is interesting, but you think is also interesting, or maybe more people would be interested in. And then finally, help them brainstorm some places they can find cited material, i.e. research about their topic. So maybe you can say, hey, if you're going to do a speech about shoelaces, there was an awesome How Things Are Made documentary I know about that you could use for this speech. There you go. That's kind of what I would expect you to do by Sunday, right? So as you can tell, like you need this first part of the post in order to do the second part of the assignment. So that's why this is due Wednesday, and this is due a few days later on Sunday. So again, there aren't really many people here right now. In fact, there are only 2. But if there are any questions, go ahead and type them into chat. Otherwise, I think we're pretty much done here. This is your assignment for the week. Again, and I'll put a special announcement out. You do need to watch another video that goes over the informative speech more specifically about what it is, how long it is, and so on. But if you have any questions about that right now, I'll be happy to answer them. I've got to wait a while because it's like a good 20-second delay, so please forgive the awkwardness of this. Well, it's been about a minute, so it doesn't seem like anyone that's watching has a question that right now. So in any case, if you do have a question later, go ahead and send me an email, or better yet, let's put it in the discussion forum so that other people can see your question and answer. Informative speech support forum. Let's go ahead and make sure that you can edit your own posts. And then we'll hit submit for that. Ask questions here, or you can ask them to me through email. Again, there is a video that I would like for you to watch. It's about an hour long. It's going to be in the description of this video if you're watching this on YouTube. I'm also going to put an announcement up just right after I go offline that'll have the link to that video in it as well, so that you have a couple places where you can watch it. And you'll need that information as well to kind of start thinking about this assignment. This will be due, by the way, not this coming week, obviously, because you're doing just this stuff for this week, but the week after. All right, so it's coming fast, guys and gals. It is approaching, so you need to get to it. But you guys seem to be catching up with it. You're asking questions. That's always good. So thanks so much, everybody, and thanks for your attention this evening. I will catch you all later.